standards of being a dad. And I just wanted to just bring these ideas back up just very briefly this morning, because these ideas flow right into what we're going to talk about this morning. So last week what we looked at was the idea of raising the standard of being a man, being an uncle, being a grandfather. And the reality is it's even raising the standard of being a woman. What we looked at is that a man is an adult male who accepts his masculinity, speaks and acts with maturity, embraces responsibility, functions interdependently. Remember, I like that one. Interdependently, when kids are raised, they're very dependent. When they become teenagers, they want to be interdependent, but there's got to be independent, but there's got to be an interdependency within families. Can lead the family faithfully and recognizes his accountability as an image bearer of God. So if you missed last week's Sunday, you got the whole half-hour teaching right there. It's all up there. But today I want us to talk about something else. About parenting. What does it actually mean to be... I had this in the wrong place, Hank. Okay, we may go back to this one. What it actually means in some respects to parent. Well, there's always the question as, why do we want kids? Especially when you're just a brand new parent and you got that beautiful little child, that baby, that when they're an infant, they're wonderful, and then they get to be 2 years old. And you get into what's often called the terrible twos, which I like to call more the terrific twos. Ironically, about 15, 18 years ago, I saw an article in Parenting Magazine. I was sitting in the doctor's office, and the article was called the terrific twos, not the terrible twos. But why do we want kids? And I know some of you are thinking about having kids nowadays. Why do we want them? Well, in the past, people wanted kids to work the farm. I can tell you, I heard that from friends out in South Dakota. The idea was you want to have kids in order to raise them up and take over the farming business. Some people want kids for their old age. The argument of, okay, who's going to have to take care of mom and dad in their old age? There you go, Rick. You got your mom. Some parents want kids to take care of them in their old age. Why do we want kids? The psalmist says that blessed is the man, the woman who has their quiver full. So the past idea, the Dutch idea, I know the Catholic idea was to have your quiver full of 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 kids. Most of us today would look at that and say, that's crazy. To have 12 kids in your family. But some of you maybe who are a bit older, were raised with that many siblings, believing that was a gift of God. Blessed is a man or woman who has their quiver full. But the question is, with kids, why do we want them? But then, once we have them, what do we do with them? How do we raise them? What's the goal? About 13, 14 years ago, I happened to go to a Willow Creek conference. Willow Creek is a very large church in Chicago. Bill Hybels is the pastor there. Bill Hybels graduated from Kalamazoo Christian many, many years ago. And at the conference, they challenged us to think about what was our goal. What was our theme? What was our mission statement, if you want to say that, to having kids? Not simply to have kids, to raise them to work the family farm, or to raise them to take care of us when we get old, or to raise them because they're a lot of fun to have, like a puppy that's brand new, to have like a brand new kid. Not that, but what really is your goal? What do you plan on? What do you want to happen with your children as you're raising them? And as I sat there at Willow Creek, it started to gel on me really what has been my goal since 1982 when I first became a parent. And I hadn't formulated it before, and some of you know where I'm going with this because I've shared this before, but I've never actually talked about these ideas. And it hit me that I think there's three things that as a parent I'm called to do. 3 things that maybe I really did well with, 3 things that maybe I didn't do so well with, but I'm still working on. 3 things that deal with spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being of our children. Spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being of our children in order to raise up our children. So this morning, as we look at these ideas, I don't want any of you to sit back and say, well, since we're not a parent, this doesn't apply to us, because all of us are uncles and aunts. A lot of us are grandparents. Some of you, as I said, are parents who are not parents quite yet. You're wanting to be parents. You're thinking about having kids. What hit me was the fact that, number one, spiritually, we are called to raise faith-filled children who are faith-filled. Number one. I got some passages for each one of these ideas that I'm going to just throw out. We're not going to look at all the passages in depth, but if you want, I encourage you to write them down if possible on your bulletin, and go home and take a look at some of these passages later. But to raise faith-filled children, Joshua, who was the individual who was chosen by Yahweh God to lead the Hebrew people across the Jordan River after their 40 years in the desert, challenges the Jewish people before he dies. And he says, who are you going to follow? Who are you going to follow? Who are you going to worship? Who are you going to chase after? Joshua says, as for me and my household, great passage, we will serve the Lord. This sort of gets back to what we looked at last week, that a man has to be a faithful leader, spiritually a faithful leader in their family. So Joshua says, I desire to teach my family, number one, to serve the Lord. I want to be that leader within my family. What are we called to do as parents, as grandparents, as uncles and aunts? Is to teach our children to serve the Lord. Deuteronomy has this to say. The first part of this verse is interesting because we're going to look at it in the second idea of the emotional. First part deals with love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But then the author of Deuteronomy goes on here and he says, we need to put these upon our hearts, our children's hearts, about love. We need to impress them on our children. Some of you may remember about 4 or 5 weeks ago, we did talk about this verse, and I brought up here the cement and the press thing that Larry Waltice had brought me, and how when the cement is laying out, you take that mold and you press it into the cement and you pull it up and it becomes molded and the cement sets. And it makes a beautiful sidewalk. We are called as parents, grandparents, uncles, and aunts to impress the importance of spirituality, the relationship with Jesus Christ, on our children. Talk with them about it when you're at home, when you're walking along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. What is my goal? To strive to raise faith-filled children, faith-filled adults. Hebrews says, let us consider how we can spur one another on towards good, and let us not avoid getting together in worship or meeting together like some do, but let's get together. Let's know that the fact that when we are together as a body, we grow spiritually. Now, I do agree that you can be a Christian without being part of a church, without ever attending worship. You can. Just like you can cut your finger off and it will survive so long on ice, and after a while it's going to die. We're called to teach our children. And again, these ideas that I'm bringing up this morning is not just speaking into our children, but really we're speaking into our children's children, or our children's children's children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren. So we're called to encourage the fact that spirituality is part of that relationship with Jesus Christ that we get together with. And the last passage here is one which has, for me, long time, 30 years, this has been a passage which has been on my heart. What good is it if a man, if a woman gains the whole world and yet